So in 2015, Brad Stevens was coaching the Boston Celtics. Now he's the general manager. Previously, he had been the highly successful young basketball coach at Butler. And in a talk that he was giving at the Positive Coaching Alliance Clinic, he shared his 2 keys to leadership. And I remember the second one really stuck out to me. And the second one was this.
The second thing that I think is really important that sometimes gets lost in the leadership shuffle, okay, and that is being authentic. Because you're in the position you're in for a reason. And to try to be somebody else is not what's going to help you be the most successful that you can be. But the piece of advice that I got from a friend who had just taken over a college job when I first got mine was, just be yourself. And if it's not good enough, that's okay. Right? You just be yourself. You do everything that you possibly can to help your team have success.
Be yourself. Be authentic. That's a common piece of advice we get as coaches. Yet, what does it really mean to be authentic? I found that advice very confusing as a young coach. I wasn't even sure who I was at the time. And now, in today's sporting landscape, it's not just confusing, it's honestly a little scary. Well, if you have struggled with this confusion or fear as a coach, no worries, because in today's episode, we are going to do a deep dive into authenticity in coaching, what it looks like, and how we can be better at it. Welcome to the Coaching Culture Podcast, the podcast to help you grow as a leader and build a better culture. I'm JP Nurbin, and I'm joined by my friends and co-hosts, Nate Sanderson and Betsy Butterick. If you want to get the notes to this and every episode of the newsletter, be sure to subscribe to our weekly newsletter. You can do that at tocculture.com. Just click on newsletter. In addition to this podcast, I'm a leadership coach and culture consultant. To learn more about my business, TOC, and how it can support you and your team, visit tocculture.com. To learn more about Betsy and her work as a coach and communication specialist, go to betsybutterick.com.
Any coach that's ever gone for a job interview, when they're asking their peers, how do I hit this out of the park? How do I make sure that I interview really well? The piece of advice that's often given to them by people who know them is, hey, just be yourself. I mean, that's going to be the thing that they need to know is, who are you and why are you the best person for the job? And even when we're sending, little kids to the first day of school or camp, and we're like, oh, you're going to make friends. Don't worry about it. Just be yourself. This idea of authenticity in coaching and how important it is to be authentic, and also how problematic that can be for many coaches today who feel like, I can't be myself, or this is just who I am. And that's not acceptable to whether it's my players or my parents or my administration. So this idea around, it's really important, this thing called authenticity. And yet it can also be a challenge for many coaches in a variety of ways. So I'd love to unpack a little, what is authenticity? Why is it so challenging? And how is it showing up in the coaching profession?
See, when I think about that word authenticity, it's, I think sometimes maybe overused or misused is probably the right word. Maybe it's not even overused, but it's more misused by coaches today. And I've seen that they use authenticity oftentimes. Like if I look back at my high school coach, this is who I am, was a defense of the way that he treated us, right? The way that he would blow up on us, his lack of control over his emotions, and kind of the bully coach that he was, right? As Joe Ehrman kind of defines those types of coaches as bully coaches, he was a bully coach. And for him, that was him being authentic. And I've always struggled with coaches that claim authenticity, but are really not willing to evolve who they are, and as a coach, they might evolve their strategies, they might evolve their tactics or techniques, but they're not evolving themselves. How else do you guys see authenticity being misconstrued, or when you think about authenticity, what is it not, that oftentimes people make a claim that it is?
Well, I think, JP, like you said, if you look at Twitter and you look at the justification for certain coaching behaviors, whether it's old school coaching or it's hard coaching or it's coaching through anger or it's coaching through fear, or it's this bully coaching that you talked about that you experienced in your high school playing days, a lot of times it's used as an excuse for bad behavior, as though I can't change. I've always been this way. I'm hot wired to react to situations with passion and with energy, and sometimes that comes off as being combative. And I think that's the first place that I would start here, is that anytime we see this word as an excuse, perhaps for behavior that could be better in the moment, whether it's an emotional reaction or it's just a pattern of behavior over time, I think that's a red flag for me to say, I'm not sure that's really what we're talking about here when it comes to authenticity. I think when I think about what that means to me, I come back to this idea of, how do I want to be seen, or how is it beneficial for me in my role as a coach to be seen and to be understood, in order, number one, for me to show up more effectively, and two, for my team to be able to understand where I'm coming from a little bit better. And I think that's where it can be really difficult for coaches to try to figure out, how do I wander through this gray area of self-disclosure versus, what if I say the wrong thing? What if a parent finds out? What if something I share goes viral on social media? What if my players reject, who I am? So I think there's a lot of fear that comes along with maybe what authenticity really is. But we're trying to find a place where we can operate from a place of strength, where it enhances who we are, versus behaviors that probably should change and we just are unwilling to do so.
And you brought up a lot there, Nate, with, I mean, so much. We could go in a variety of directions here. I want to focus in on one thing you said about that fear, almost the fear of being seen. What if I show up as myself, and that's either not accepted, not enough, perhaps even rejected, because I know myself to be this way, and I'm worried that that doesn't fit with what's going to be effective or accepted or successful in this space. And one of the challenges that we have with authenticity as a coach is, when we hold back giving information to our players, to the people that are part of our program about who we are, we unintentionally create greater space for misunderstanding. So we, for very good reasons important to us, protect our authenticity. We keep it close because we worry about what others are going to think of it when they know who we are or how we are. And yet in doing so, we unintentionally create space for them to misunderstand who we are or how we are. There's so many different layers to this. So it's like the fear, I get it. I get why people are worried about showing up authentically. And yet when we don't show up authentically, we almost have a different set of issues or challenges come into that space.
I think on that of just being understood, I think there's a lot of coaches that might communicate to their players, this is who I am, and they're really pointing to their style of coaching, or maybe even their personality, or as Nate talked about, some of those default reactions, responses, or really reactions that we have as a coach. And so I'm curious, when you think about authenticity and style of coaching, which I think a lot of coaches feel attached to their style of coaching, that many would say a style is part of who they are. Yeah, I'll be curious what you both think of when you think of authenticity and style and that relationship.
If we historically look at some of the different coaching styles, and having a basketball background, I think often about the late Pat Summitt, and how Pat Summitt's style was very authentic to who she was as a person. And yet, if we took Pat's style and we put it into the context of today's sport landscape, I don't know that she would have had the success or the opportunity for the success that she had in the way that she did at the time that she was coaching. And so understanding that style is one element of authenticity, and we can layer into it values, beliefs, experiences, anything that informs style that relates to authenticity. And I think you use the word JP about part of authenticity, and looking at those different parts, like, what is authenticity? If you're going to be yourself, I think we first need to ask the question, who am I? And I understand, if anyone who's ever made a dating profile, that's really hard. How do I put out to the world in a very public way who I am? What language do I use to define that? What points about me or parts of me do I choose to highlight? And for what purpose? Also, what am I leaving out of that description or that information that I'm making known to other people? And what are those reasons about as well?
Well, let me ask you this question. What are some examples, either for you or for coaches that you've worked with, of parts of themselves or parts of yourself that you're afraid to be seen? Like, where does the rubber meet the road when it comes to the parts of our authentic self that we are afraid of showing for whatever reason? Can you think of any just examples of what that might actually look like?
Nate, two that come to mind frequently in the work that I do with coaches, and this is across genders. I'm a really passionate coach, and or I'm a very direct coach. So these are often two parts of someone's authentic self that they may be afraid to bring to their coaching style, their coaching environment, in part because of the way those parts have been received in the past. The benefit of being very transparent about those things, I'm a very passionate coach, I'm a very direct coach, is when we can help athletes start to understand who we are and how we are, there's less room for them to misinterpret what those elements of us mean. For example, if I'm a very passionate coach, I might have a loud volume. I might exhibit large gestures or have loud presence or body language. If, let's say, I am a parent sitting across a field in the stands and I don't know that my child's coach is very passionate, it would be easy for me to interpret volume, big gestures, as perhaps anger, when truly it's just a reflection of how much they care or how engaged or involved they are in that moment or in their coaching. So elements that people are often afraid to share or to show, in part often because they've received poorly in the past, are also some of the same elements that I think it's very important that they exhibit authentically, or at least prepare their players to understand, this is something that's true about me. This is how it shows up. And I want to be really transparent in that information so that there's no misunderstanding about what it means when you see that from me.
Yeah, what you just shared there, Betsy, really resonates with me because I remember my wife, who's had multiple stops in her, corporate career at Amazon and Chewy.com and now Google. One thing I love for her is that she's at a place where she says, I can just be myself. And in previous stops, the culture at these other companies was she really didn't want to talk about the fact that she was a mother or married and had children, and at the time she was breastfeeding, and that was like embarrassing for her, right? To that part of being a mother due to the culture, right? Like it just, she was afraid to bring that part of herself. She can also be direct and passionate, but she feared doing that out of the same things that you're mentioning there of how women are perceived when they're a little bit more direct. And so for her to be able to just say over the last few years, I just feel like I can be myself. And what does that mean for her? That means that she's actually having conversations with colleagues that are, pregnant or having children soon, or she can show up and be direct and not fear that she's being seen or perceived in this negative way. That would be unfair because men wouldn't have been seen in that way. So I think that's just spot on. I think a few examples that I would also give here. One that comes to mind is just one coach specifically that I've worked with over the years, who, as a head coach, was so afraid to be non-coach, right, for his players. Like off the court, he's a funny guy with his friends. He's oftentimes the life of the party, but he shows up as coach, and all of a sudden he's like super serious, and even outside of practice. And I got to know a little bit of that personality and that funny side of him. And I listened to some of his stories. I'm like, hey man, do you ever share that part of you with your players? And he's like, no. And the amazing thing is now he's been working to bring that more and more. And it is such a joy for him in coaching, and so incredible for me to see how he shows up with joy now. Because like, what's been the best part of the season? He's going to always say, oh, it's cutting up with the guys and having our jokes and stuff like that. That was not the case 3-4 years ago. And so for him to bring just that, let's say, just comical, fun, part of his personality, identity, right, to his coaching was just really, really cool. I also think another area that people struggle more and more today is whether it's faith or just personal beliefs, right, around the world, their worldview. It's the political discourse in the country and oftentimes the rest of the world is really, really challenging. Where those types of things are maybe they're not who we are at our core, but there's some core beliefs around faith or other personal views that people are afraid to share those, and because of the kind of some the fallout from sharing those personal beliefs, how they'll be perceived. And I think that's probably not just in coaching, that's probably in a lot of other areas in our life, today as well too. So those would be two big areas as well, Nate.
I think Betsy hit the nail on the head here when it comes to some of the things that make us fearful about showing up as our authentic self. And that is how we've been received in the past. I mean, I think about taking the job here at Mount Vernon. I'm going into my third year. I'm finally more comfortable, I think, this year showing up the way I want to on a consistent daily basis without being afraid of getting a parent email or being called into the office. But there's still part of me that when I write the weekly email and I'm trying to frame our experiences in a positive way, in the back of my mind, there's a little voice that says, they're not buying this. This is not what everybody thinks, because that's what I experienced in my last stop as a head coach. And that reminds me of Daniel Coyle's work in the Culture Code, where he talks about the vulnerability dance, and how cultures are built. We take a small step forward, we look around, we see if anybody else took a small step forward of, personal disclosure or vulnerability. And if they don't, we quickly hop back in line because we don't want to be the one that's sticking out there. And if you've been in a situation where you've stepped out, and I think from my own experiences, things that are foundational to me are I'm starting and operating from a place of love. More than anything else, when it comes to basketball or culture or transformation or anything else, what drives me more than anything is loving my players. Now, I don't, greet them at practice and say, oh, it's great to see you today, Brandon, love you. We're not doing that. But with all of our actions, that's what we're being driven from. But I feel like that's not necessarily, transformational coaches may operate from a similar intention, but that's not necessarily widely accepted in a lot of places. I mean, we can think of examples, JP, of coaches that we've worked with that have wanted to use the game to grow people and have been told, look, man, your job is to win games here. We're not here to build character. We're here to have success on the court or out on the field. And when you start to hear that, then all of a sudden we become a lot more cautious and a lot more fearful about, again, operating from that place of passion or from mission. And I think that's really hard sometimes for transformational coaches to figure out how to navigate.
Anytime we get information from people about how we have to be in a space, now we're able to take that information and compare it to who we understand ourselves to be. And then, much like we would adapt a game strategy based off of what's happening in the moment, we can adapt, not change, but perhaps adapt ourselves to best fit whatever circumstance or situation we find ourselves in. So if I know that the expectation is for me personally to be this type of coach, maybe that doesn't organically fit with who I take myself to be. Perhaps it's an opportunity for growth individually of, oh, I can be more effective in this space if I were to start with authenticity and make adaptations that are strategic for success. So I think that that's something that we can do. Oftentimes the conversation is, I am or am not that thing. So this is either a good fit or not a good fit. When instead the conversation would be interesting. How can I, within my integrity, make adaptations so that I still show up authentically in the context of what's being asked of me or of my program?
Betsy, I think that's spot on. The question that's coming up for me is probably the word that we talk about, one of the words that we use the most in this podcast is the word intentional, right? I want to be intentional as a coach. So, I've got my values and I'm trying to align my behaviors and also the way that we run our program, our systems, all are intentionally aligned with that. And I wonder, I've heard you use this word calculated, and I'm kind of curious, what's the difference in this theme of intentionality versus calculated coaching?
Yeah, that can be a tricky question for many folks. And recently I was having a conversation with a coach who I've begun working with for the first time. And I asked them, not having been present at your practice, how would you describe your coaching style? And they smiled and they said, well, I feel like this year specifically, my coaching style has been much more calculated based on the feedback I received at the end of last year. And they said, I want to say intentional, but calculated feels more accurately like how I've had to be. And they went on to describe, spending extra time, or in their words, an exorbitant amount of time thinking about, this is what I want to say. How do I need to say it in a way that matches with the feedback I got from the surveys last year? And so within this desire to coach authentically, many coaches are transitioning to a place of being more calculated in how they say things. And this isn't always a negative. For many individuals, the feedback they've received is the necessary evolution of how coaching has evolved to a place to be more athlete-centered, to be not necessarily positive, but supportive. And so sometimes the calculation is more accurately, these are the adaptations I'm still learning to make behaviorally or in my communication to show up as my best authentic self for the athletes that I'm seeking to serve.
So one thing that I want to circle back on, that Betsy, you posed this question that we have to, kind of ask ourselves as coaches, who am I? And I think Nate, you just spoke to it just a second ago there really well about something that's so core to you, about yourself is, before everything else, it's going to start with love, and Betsy, I was hoping you could kind of maybe speak to this a little bit of just, that's a complicated question. Who am I? How could, should coaches approach that?
When we're seeking to answer that question, who am I? And again, we mean it in such a well-intentioned way, sometimes without realizing the depth of work that it takes to truly answer that question in a way that feels authentic. Oftentimes, and this reflects a little bit some of the authenticity as an excuse isn't truly authenticity. Whenever I hear a coach say, well, this is who I am, how I interpret that most accurately is, this is who I've been. So this is who I am is more accurately, this is who I've been, or this is who I currently take myself to be, which for many people can be the end of a conversation. Oh, well, that's just the way you are and you're not going to change. Then we have nothing more to discuss here. For me, instead of this is who I am being a period, it becomes a comma. And what follows is, this is who I am, meaning this is who I've been. And here's how I would like to grow or change. And here's what's being asked of me in my current coaching environment. So understanding who someone's been is foundational for informing, okay, who am I? Who have I been to this point? And who would I like to be? Or who do I need to be? Or who do I aspire to be? There's different directions we can go from there. But if we're going to answer the question, who am I? We have to understand who we've been, look at where we are, and then make some decisions about where we want to go. And what can we carry over from who we've been? And what might we be better served leaving in the past or adapting or changing to stay authentic and show up as we are in a way that might be new from who we've been.
Yeah, I love that comma move there, because I think even that statement of this is who I am, is so almost like a fixed mindset towards ourselves, and I even look at that phrase that's very common, to be my best self. And I would say my best self, while I'm constantly striving for that, I know I'm never, achieving that, but my best self is also evolving. Like who that person will be that I'm striving for, like that's somewhat changing. One thing I played around a lot with in the last 5 years is like core values. So I've had like my own core values. I've had my company core values. Me and my wife have sat down and we set out core values for our family, and we've played around with that. And, I've kind of firmed up maybe 3 that I just really try to bring to every aspect of my life. But I would say even those are just the wording's changing, what they look like. So it's something that's even so important to me when it comes to love and curiosity and discipline and joy, right? Like, my understanding of what that could be and how that will how I will bring that to my family, to my work, to other people, like that's evolving. So to say, well, this is just who I am is such a, finite, such a, fixed mindset approach to ourself. And I think we just need to have that more of that growth mindset to ourselves. And I know that in a few weeks' time, we're going to have Brad Stolberg on the podcast, who wrote the book Master of Change. And he just talks about this cultivating a fluid sense of self. And that's something we're going to hit on big with him.
Nate, you mentioned that example before of writing an email to your parents and wanting to put it in a positive way. Can you talk a little bit about, for you personally, how does authenticity show up? You mentioned everything comes from a place of love. You mentioned having the intention to be positive. What does authenticity look like for you in how you coach, knowing that there may be different perceptions or judgments about how you should be coaching?
Yeah, I think it comes from a place of understanding that I'm going to be most effective when I'm true to that self. And there's a lot of other examples that come to mind of ways I think that we do things differently that can be misperceived easily. If you watch our sideline demeanor as a staff, we don't yell at kids, we don't remote control the game, we're not screaming out actions every time the ball is passed or on offense or defense. If you watch this in practice, we're not getting kids on the line. We really see ourselves as teachers first. The relationships we build with kids when we do our one-on-ones, again, it starts from this place of love where we're trying to connect with the person first, and we'll get to the basketball stuff, but we want them to know that they're seen and we're checking in on them and that sort of thing. And so I think there's a level of confidence that comes from seeing how our players have responded to that over the years. I mean, they understand why we don't pull somebody after a mistake. I don't want to introduce the idea of fear for them missing a shot, turning the ball over. I'll leave them in longer, sometimes after a mistake, just to make sure that it's not associated in their mind with, oh, I turned it over. Now I'm afraid if I make another mistake, coach is going to pull me. And then all of a sudden they're tight, and that sort of thing. So I think when players understand where we're coming from and why, and then we start to see some success or some positive response from them, that goes a long ways, obviously, in insulating yourself from maybe what the parents are thinking or what people in the stands are thinking. I think if we're being honest here, JP, I mean, I've been fortunate to have some success, which leads to some credibility to the way that we've approached things. But there is even a temptation in starting a new job, or coming out of an evaluation at my last job, where I just think to myself, do I just need to be the person that they think that I should be, or they're telling me that I should be, whether that's in response to, player evaluations at the end of the year, or it's what administration tells you in your evaluation that, you need to do more fundamentals, coach, or you need to be harder on the kids when they're not playing hard, or, whatever those comments might be. There is part of us that just says, well, maybe I'll be a chameleon here and try to be the person that they think I should be at the expense of who I know that I am.
That's such a true statement, Nate, for so many coaches today. Is I feel like I have to make a choice. I have to choose between who I know myself to be, what I would say is my authentic self, and who I'm being told I need to be in this space as a coach. Again, whether it's from surveys, from administration, from parents, even from players. And this is the space that a lot of coaches feel stuck in, is having to make that choice. The thing that I found to be true, and again, very biased as a communication specialist, is I think there's a different conversation that can happen that takes us away from feeling like we have to choose one or the other. For me, this becomes a yes and. And again, it's about information. Yes, you take yourself to be this type of coach. In your authenticity, you show up this way. And you're being asked to make these adaptations. Sometimes the bridge between the two is a conversation about understanding. I want you to understand it's not that I don't value being very communicative in games to players. The reason that I don't speak as much or yell often in a game on the sideline is because we've already had those conversations in practice. So you, administrator, what you see as me not looking engaged during games is actually because we've done that work in advance, and I've given this space of competition over to the players to make decisions without me adding my voice to it. So sometimes it's less that we have to choose between one or the other or sacrifice our authenticity. Sometimes what's truly needed is better conversations, or maybe more frequent conversations, to create shared understanding that allows both to be true. I have this need to show up as my authentic self. Players have this need to have this certain experience. Can we find a way to do both without sacrificing one or the other?
All right, just a short time on the podcast to let you know some resources to help you better understand who you are as a coach, who you want to become as a coach. You understand your philosophy better. In my book, The Culture System, part 1 of the book is fully dedicated to understanding your leadership philosophy, which is your mission, vision, values, and standards. But it isn't just that. It's also knowing, because knowing your why isn't enough. We need to have the right mindset and behaviors to support the mission, vision, values, and standards. So if you're looking for guidance, be sure to check out The Culture System. It's available on Audible, Amazon, and Apple Books. Now, if you're not much of a reader, good news is you can get access to our 2-hour course, Clarify Your Leadership Philosophy, at tocculture.com. Just go to the online courses tab at the top. We'll put a link to the course and the book in the details of this episode. Both are hugely valuable resources that will help you on this journey. Yeah, there's a couple things that come to mind. One is I'm just kind of getting a little bit of visions of Roy Kent from Ted Lasso coaching the little girls team, and he's swearing and all that, and parents to teachers are, you can't be that, Roy. It's like this is such a part of himself is the swearing guy, right? But I think sometimes, in some cases, that challenge from others, can help us to evolve and grow ourselves, right? There's an element. Roy Kent could find a more empathetic way of being, a way of speaking with less profanity. That there's some challenges that are be good for us. I mean, I think around one of my core values as a coach is competitive, and yet I'm coaching under 8s at the moment, right, myself, and it's like, well, JP's competitive cauldron, which is really, really important to me as a coach, just doesn't work here. And so it's something that may come later in that coaching journey with those players. And I think it comes back to sometimes we need to try to meet them where they're at when it comes to some of our things around, not just style, but identity. Like, so for an example of this is 3-4 years ago, I was coaching basketball here in Ireland, a women's semi-professional team. And the feedback I got after 2 games was, we need you to be more assertive, which they had been yelled at in most of their careers. Some of these women were in their 30s, and they wanted someone that was just going to be on the sidelines, just constantly loud and vocal. I would say that that's not the style that I prefer, but it's not even just style. That's part of like what's really important to me as a coach, is that players feel empowered. It's not just a coach-led team, but it's more of a player-led team. And I don't feel like if I do that type of coaching, I'm creating an environment where that can grow. Now, what did I do in that response? I didn't just say, well, tough luck, you guys have to figure it out. I said, okay, there's a part of me that can be more assertive. Many of my former players would definitely remind me of that, right? But I can lean into that a little bit, right? And do it in a place where I still feel like I am staying true to my core values and what's really important to me, knowing that I'm taking them on a bit of a journey here to move to this place. So for other coaches like yourself, that really want to talk about love, or maybe not talk about love, but they're going to be really into that high relationship stuff, getting to them as people. Some athletes that's going to be a trigger for them. Why is this coach asking me about my personal life, right? We've seen that with some of our clients that we've worked with. So it's just, okay, it's going to be a little bit more of a slower dance with those individuals, right? We're not going to go into the conversations asking them personal questions because that makes them uncomfortable, right? But our hope is that we can eventually get there.
And you bring up a really important point, JP, and it happened for me at the end of a workshop. A coach came up to me and said, okay, Betsy, here's the thing. I'm not a yeller as a coach. And yet my best player has told me recently they need me to yell at them. How do I navigate that space while still being my authentic self? Exact words that she used. And the conversation that we had is, first, understanding or asking the player, why do you feel yelling facilitates your success? Like, what is it about that style that you feel is essential in order for you to do well or perform well? So starting from that point, and then much like you said, making the adaptation of, okay, it's it's out of my authenticity to yell because I'm not a yeller. I've never been a yeller. So while I won't be yelling at you, here's what I can do. In service of being more direct, I'm going to give you very direct feedback. It won't be at volume, maybe that because that's outside of my authenticity, but it is going to be very clear. And that's how we're going to work on, marrying the two, the desire in contrast to the authenticity, rather than feeling like, oh, well, if you want me to yell and I'm not a yeller, clearly this isn't a good fit. So I think that sometimes we stop just shy of progress that we can make as coaches, that we can make in service of the relationship while retaining our authenticity. And that's the key point that I come back to often in conversations is in the moments where we feel like we're being asked to sacrifice or disregard our authenticity, those are often also the moments where a different conversation can happen that allows us to not only retain that authenticity, but make ourselves better known and understood to those that we're coaching.
I think that's spot on. And I think it connects back to just explain the why. I remember 3 years ago with those players, I said, well, what about, why do you need that? Or why do you feel like you need that type of coaching? And then it was an opportunity for me to say, well, listen, this is why I don't do it, because I believe in you. I feel like you got way more experience. You don't need me to be telling you what to do all the time, right? I trust you guys. And so that became a great stepping stone for us. And I know, Nate, you do a really good job of explaining that why behind that as well.
Well, this part of the conversation, JP, reminds me of when we had Jason Caldwell on, and he talked about, everybody's in that boat going across the Atlantic Ocean for different reasons. And he had to get to a place as a leader where he could be comfortable with his teammates being in the boat, not necessarily chasing the world record like he was. And yet they're all striving for the same goal, and I think that's one of the things that I had to adjust to here at Mount Vernon, and like coming out of my experience at Linmar, where one of the justifications for pushing me out was, well, we weren't winning enough, and so that really soured me on the idea of how stupid is this, that our whole life is thrown upside down because our girls can't throw a ball through a circle as good as a couple other teams in our area, and so my thought reaction to that was just, I just don't, at the end of the day, I don't care about winning at all. It really doesn't matter. Well, when you walk in the entryway at Mount Vernon, the first thing that smacks you in the face is a phrase, excellence in the arena. It's assumed that we're going to be good at everything across the board, academics, athletics, fine arts. We want to be the best in the state at everything. So my reaction to seeing that sign, I remember during my interview process, was like, oh, this is signals that winning is really important here. And I probably shouldn't minimize it when I'm talking about what my core philosophies are. What I didn't realize now being in the job is how important winning is even to the players. And I know everybody wants to win, but like it's hard coming into a practice, or it's hard trying to frame a season from my perspective saying, I want to create a great experience and I want people to love each other, and whatever happens, happens. And players coming in thinking, well, that's great, coach, but we want to make it to the state tournament. Or even my fourth graders, I'm coaching my daughter's team, and the feedback we got after their third grade year was, we wish we were winning more. That never crossed my mind a single time, when I was with them as 9-year-olds. And so it's something where it hasn't necessarily forced me to change my values. I still don't really care about winning that much. But it has forced me to acknowledge that that is in the soup, that is an ingredient that's important to the culture of Mount Vernon and to the players that are in our program. And rather than what I've done in the past, which is kind of try to reposition it and say, yeah, it's important, but it's not as important as X, Y, or Z. I think we've just sort of embraced that there is a drive here to be excellent and to achieve at a high level. And these values that are important to me will help us to be able to do that. And so it's almost an incorporation of that, overall cultural value into, or in combination with, the things that I think are most important as our program. Rather than minimizing that, I think I've had to learn to embrace that, and then again, sort of adopt it into a better flavored soup for the culture of our program.
All right, just one more time out to let you know about the online certification course that has helped hundreds of coaches in the last year to transform their leadership, their team, and even their organization. We've had clubs, athletic departments, and coaches educating and equipping their coaching staffs with the TOC Transformational Coaching and Culture Certification. We've recently broken down the 8-hour course into 3 levels of certification. so you can choose the right level and commitment for your staff. To learn more about the course, pricing, and packaging for your team, department, or club, go to tocculture.com and click on certification.
Nate, you just articulated something that I think is so important for coaches to hear, is that if you can incorporate what's being asked in a way that doesn't at all sacrifice your authenticity. You personally don't value winning. However, you absolutely value striving for success. So how can we look at the thing that we're being asked to do, the way that we're being asked to show up, and then put it in the context of our authenticity? Now, I'll say there are certain situations where if what we're being asked to do or how we're being asked to show up does not at all fit or blend with or make a better soup with our authenticity, for me, then that's out of integrity. And when something's out of integrity, that's a different conversation. Can we go back and adjust those expectations? Or do we need to consider, is this the right fit for me? Which I know could be a completely different conversation.
Well, as we wrap up the conversation here this week, I think the one thing that I would say to coaches, because we know we're speaking to people in all different contexts. There are some that have received harsh criticism for being who they are. There are others that have been hiding for a while, just afraid to step out. And there are others who, are operating in a place of strength at being comfortable in their own skin, in their coaching positions. And the thing that I would just encourage for coaches that maybe have been afraid, or quite honestly, maybe have been hurt in the past, is going all the way back to that vulnerability dance with Daniel Coyle. You don't have to jump out into the middle of the dancing circle and be in the spotlight for everybody to see all that you can and can't do and all that you are and are not. I think it starts with just small steps. It starts in one-on-ones, and asking players. Like, one of our rules in our one-on-ones is that they have to ask me a question to get out of the one-on-one. Usually that's about basketball. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's about being a dad. Sometimes it's about, I had a kid the other day ask me, what are your hopes for your kids when they become adults? What an amazing question. You're not going to get that from everybody, but there's a moment there where we talk about the end goal of, at least for us in this authenticity dance, is human connection. And so just creating small steps, little opportunities to be seen, for your players to see you in the way that you'd like to show up, and finding just a little bit of encouragement along the way, I think is the best way to start moving into a place where we feel more comfortable showing up as ourselves on a daily basis.
So I want to finish today's episode on authenticity by reading a short passage from my newest book, The Sports Parent Solution. Now, while I am talking about being authentic with sports parents, the message applies to all members of our program, our athletes especially. Be authentic, not one-dimensional. In order for parents to see us as people, we must allow ourselves to be seen beyond just our coaching role. Many coaches often feel the need to maintain a constant coach persona around parents or to conform to certain expectations. However, from my studies and experiences working with some of the greatest coaches, I've learned that they all have at least one thing in common. They know who they are as both a coach and a person, and these aspects are intertwined. They don't consciously try to be authentic. It's simply the only way they know how to be themselves. When you step into your role as a coach, bring your whole self. Don't be afraid to discuss your family, background, and interests outside of coaching. Share your personal stories, including owning the challenges and experiences you've had as a parent and coach. So in this passage, what I'm really getting at is the importance of bringing your full self into coaching. And while there is a lot of risk in that, there is also a lot of potential for great power to enhance your ability to influence and build connections. And there also can be a lot of peace in being authentic. Don't forget to buy a copy of my newest book, The Sports Parent Solution, which you can get on Amazon and Apple Books. Also, thanks for listening into the podcast. We're grateful for you, and we appreciate all our listeners who not only subscribe to the podcast, but who take the time to leave us a review wherever you listen to podcasts, and also those who share episodes with friends who find value in its message.